Everyone thinks the Oklahoma City bombing was a singular act. They are profoundly wrong. The 19th of April, 1995. A clear spring morning in Oklahoma City. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, a symbol of government presence, was ripped apart by a cataclysmic explosion. 168 lives extinguished in an instant. A nation recoiled in horror, seeking answers for such an unthinkable act of domestic terrorism. Timothy McVeigh, a Gulf War veteran, was swiftly identified, apprehended, and eventually convicted as the architect of this devastation. His motives, widely publicized, spoke of anti-government sentiment, a desire for revenge against federal actions at Waco and Ruby Ridge. But to truly understand the deeper currents, the underlying historical traumas that perhaps fed such rage, we must look beyond the immediate catalyst. To do so, we must travel back, some 74 years prior, to a different Oklahoma City, just 100 miles northeast, Tulsa. A city that, at the turn of the 20th century, was home to a phenomenon almost unbelievable in its prosperity and self-sufficiency: Greenwood. Greenwood was a vibrant, thriving black community, so successful, so economically powerful, it earned the moniker Black Wall Street. It was a testament to ambition and resilience, built by African Americans who, despite systemic oppression, created their own destiny. This district boasted hundreds of black-owned businesses, banks, hotels, grocery stores, luxury shops, and even its own hospital and school system. Money circulated within the community, fostering extraordinary wealth. A dollar, it said, could change hands 19 times before leaving Greenwood. Imagine a world where black Americans, barely 2 generations removed from slavery, constructed an economic powerhouse that rivaled anything in the nation. It wasn't just survival, it was flourishing, a beacon of hope and a powerful, visible counter-narrative to the prevailing racial hierarchy. But such success, in a deeply segregated America, bred resentment. The very existence of Black Wall Street challenged racial prejudices and economic norms. This prosperity, rather than being celebrated, became a source of simmering envy and fear among some white residents. The fuse was lit on May 30, 1921. A young black shoe shiner, Dick Rowland, entered an elevator in a downtown building. The elevator operator, a white teenager named Sarah Page, screamed. The exact nature of the incident remains debated, but the accusation swiftly became one of assault. Rowland was arrested. The local newspaper, the Tulsa Tribune, published a sensationalized article inciting racial animosity. A white mob began to gather outside the courthouse where Rowland was held, demanding he be lynched. This wasn't merely a dispute, it was a spark in a powder keg. Members of the Greenwood community, understanding the grave danger Rowland faced and the historical precedent of lynchings, armed themselves and went to the courthouse to protect him. They offered assistance to the sheriff, but were turned away, told their presence wasn't needed. A confrontation ensued. A shot was fired, its origin still unknown. This single sound ignited a firestorm. The white mob, now numbering in the thousands, descended upon Greenwood. What followed was an act of terror, an orchestrated destruction. Over the next 18 hours, from May 31st to June 1st, 1921, Greenwood was systematically decimated. Homes, businesses, churches all were looted and then set ablaze. White rioters, many deputized and armed by city officials, moved through the streets, murdering and destroying. Eyewitness accounts, suppressed for decades, spoke of machine guns mounted on vehicles, indiscriminately firing into crowds. Even more chilling, private planes were reportedly used to drop incendiary devices, bombs, onto the rooftops of Greenwood. The official death toll was initially reported as 36. However, historical research now estimates the number to be closer to 300, perhaps even more. Hundreds, if not thousands, were injured. Over 256 homes were burned, and 35 city blocks were utterly annihilated. The aftermath was a deliberate cover-up. Newspapers largely omitted the full extent of the horror. Photographs were confiscated. Survivors were intimidated into silence. The prosperous Black Wall Street was reduced to ashes, and its story buried under decades of collective amnesia. For generations, children were not taught about it. Many white residents of Tulsa simply pretended it never happened. Black families who lost everything were denied reparations, their trauma compounded by the erasure of their history. Now, what does this 1921 tragedy have to do with the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing? On the surface, nothing. But delve deeper into the psyche of those who feel betrayed by their government, those who believe in a grand conspiracy to suppress certain groups, and a pattern begins to emerge. The federal government's complicity, or at least its failure to protect, in the Tulsa Race Massacre was a glaring example of institutional betrayal. This wasn't merely a local riot. It was an act sanctioned by inaction, an economic and social assassination of a community. McVeigh's rage, while directed at perceived government overreach in Waco and Ruby Ridge, resonated with a broader anti-government narrative that has deep roots in American history. A narrative of powerful institutions crushing the individual, or in Tulsa's case, an entire community. Though McVeigh's motivations were distinct, his actions tapped into a vein of deep-seated distrust and resentment against federal authority. The kind of resentment that can fester when historical injustices are left unaddressed, when narratives are suppressed, and when accountability is absent. The Tulsa Race Massacre and the Oklahoma City bombing, separated by decades and vastly different in their immediate causes, both echo with the chilling consequences of unchecked hatred and profound societal fractures. One, an act of mob violence fueled by racial animosity; the other, an act of domestic terror driven by anti-government extremism. Both events serve as stark reminders that the fabric of a nation can be torn apart not just by foreign adversaries, but by internal divisions, by the failure to acknowledge historical wounds, and by the ease with which anger can be weaponized. The ghosts of Black Wall Street and the echoes of the Murrah Building explosion remind us that history is not merely a collection of dates, but a living, breathing force that shapes our present and dictates our future. To ignore one is to risk repeating the lessons of the other. Next, we unravel the enigma of the Zodiac Killer, a phantom whose terror still haunts California.